You don't belong up there." The words sliced through the air with a finality that caught even the marble columns off guard, echoing in the high, bright lobby of Meridian Corporate Tower. Derek Sullivan, head of security, stood in front of the executive elevator with his arms crossed over his chest, his stance unmistakable. This was his domain. He knew every inch of the building, every regular face, every subtle shift in the flow of suits and heels that crossed his path each day. It was a power he wore easily, like the tailored uniform that set him apart from the people whose names he rarely bothered to learn. The declaration was not a whisper, nor a quiet aside. It was a pronouncement, made loudly enough to ripple through the busy Tuesday morning crowd filling the lobby. The desk staff, Amanda Foster, with her smooth blonde hair and careful smile, Robert Hayes, who had worked his way up from fixing the boilers, glanced at each other, then at the woman standing in front of Derek, as if confirming that they were all seeing the same thing. The woman was alone, dressed simply in a navy blazer, black slacks, no designer handbag, no visible badge of rank or privilege, but carrying the kind of poise that only comes from long experience with disbelief. Jasmine Brooks met Derek's gaze, her eyes unwavering. She didn't flinch, didn't glance over her shoulder, didn't check to see if he was talking to someone behind her. She'd heard those words before, though perhaps never with so much ceremony. Behind Jasmine, the ebb and flow of the morning crowd barely slowed, but the energy had shifted. Even the most distracted commuters picked up on the tension radiating from the security station. Phones came out, some overtly, some half-hidden. People sensed an event, something charged and out of the ordinary, something that would be repeated around water coolers and in group chats for weeks to come. 12 minutes. That was all that separated Derek Sullivan from a legacy built over 2 decades and the end of his career. In 12 minutes, he would learn exactly who Jasmine Brooks was. In 12 minutes, every certainty he carried about his role, his authority, and his instincts would unravel in front of his colleagues, the board, and hundreds of silent witnesses. Jasmine waited as Derek's words settled in the air. She could see the calculation in his posture, the weight of habit, the expectation that resistance would either collapse or escalate, but never quietly endure. Jasmine's hands rested easily at her sides, her expression unreadable. Years of practice had given her that gift, the ability to mask the sting, to let the wound close instantly, leaving no visible mark. "I need access to the executive floor," she said, her tone professional, even, giving nothing away. "I have a meeting with the board of directors." Derek's eyebrows rose, his skepticism plain. "The executive floor?" he repeated, voice heavy with disbelief, as if he'd been handed a punchline rather than a request. "That's a restricted area. You need special clearance for that level." Jasmine reached into her purse and produced a white envelope stamped with the Meridian logo. Inside was a letter of introduction, her temporary access credentials printed in crisp black ink on heavy stock. She laid both items on the polished counter with slow, deliberate care. Derek picked up the envelope as though expecting it to bite. He turned it over, squinting at the letterhead, ignoring the gold-embossed details. Amanda leaned in, her curiosity sharper than her smile. "This looks irregular," Amanda announced, just loud enough for the growing line of commuters to hear. "We'll need to verify this with corporate before you can go up." Jasmine said nothing, only inclined her head a fraction, acknowledging the ritual of additional scrutiny. She was used to this, the steps added only for people who looked like her, the obstacles erected and called protocol. From the edge of the lobby, a woman named Lindsay Carter had already begun recording. A lifestyle blogger, she recognized the scent of conflict and injustice in the air, knew that these moments mattered more than the carefully curated brand launches and influencer lunches she'd come to Chicago to cover. Next to her, her friend Sarah pulled out her own phone, whispering to Lindsay, "They're really going to make a scene out of this, aren't they?" Across the lobby, maintenance worker Carlos Rivera watched the exchange. He'd worked in buildings like this for years, seen executives sweep past security with a flash of a badge or a wave from reception. He watched Derek and Amanda treat this woman like an intruder, despite the credentials she'd offered, and felt a tightening in his chest, a quiet, simmering anger at the familiarity of the scene. Robert Hayes, tall and careful, approached the counter, adding his authority to the blockade. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside while we contact our verification department. This could take some time." "How long does verification usually take?" Jasmine asked, her tone measured, polite. Derek shrugged, making a display of indifference. "Could be 20 minutes, could be an hour. Depends on how busy they are upstairs." Amanda's nails clicked softly against the countertop. "There are a lot of requests today. You'll need to wait until we have confirmation." In the back, Keisha Adams, a young black receptionist at the visitor station, watched the scene unfold, her stomach tightening with every word. She'd seen this pattern before. She'd watched as visitors who looked like her, who didn't match the picture in Derek's head of who belonged in the building, were delayed, doubted, sometimes even turned away. Her hands trembled on the keyboard. She forced herself to speak, voice steady and professional. "I can run the standard background check if you'd like. It only takes 2 minutes," Keisha offered, her eyes on Derek. Derek's reaction was swift, as if she'd violated some unspoken code. "We're handling this, Keisha. Return to your station." Keisha didn't move. "Sir, I'm just following our established protocol. Every visitor gets the same verification process." The room grew quieter. Employees slowed as they entered, drawn by the escalating voices, the cluster at the counter. Jasmine watched, noting every detail, the posture of the guards, the quick glances between Amanda and Robert, the way Derek's jaw tightened with every challenge. Jasmine took out her phone and made a call, her voice soft but unyielding. "Grace, I'm in the lobby. There seems to be some confusion about my access credentials." On the other end, Grace Kim, executive assistant to the board, answered without hesitation. "Ms. Brooks, I'll be right down. There shouldn't be any issues with your clearance." Amanda's voice cut through the space, sharper than before. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to end that call. You cannot coordinate access while standing in our lobby. That's a security violation." Jasmine ended the call, slipped her phone back into her purse, and looked directly at Amanda. "I ended the call. Now what's the next step in your verification process?" For a moment, Amanda had no answer. Derek stepped in, raising his voice. "This is Sullivan. I need backup in the main lobby. We have a potential security situation with an unauthorized individual attempting to access restricted floors." His announcement rang out, amplified by the lobby's acoustics, and suddenly the mood shifted from tense to electric. Carlos Rivera, unable to keep quiet any longer, spoke up. "Did she show you ID? Did she provide documentation?" Derek nodded, lips tight. Carlos shook his head. "Man, I've seen executives come through here in sweatpants and flip-flops. You scan their badge and send them up. What makes her different?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable, obvious, and unanswerable. Amanda tried to smooth the moment. "Look, this isn't personal. We're just doing our jobs." Keisha's voice, trembling but clear, cut through the pretense. "No, we're not. Our job is to verify credentials and provide access. She showed you her documentation. I can run the verification right now." Derek pointed at Keisha, voice rising. "You're out of line. Return to your station immediately or you'll be written up." Jasmine felt a shift inside, a familiar anger, not hot but cold and focused. Not rage, but the precision of someone who has spent a lifetime turning other people's disbelief into motivation. "I want to be very clear about what's happening here," Jasmine said, raising her voice just enough to fill the space. "I presented proper documentation for executive floor access. I've been professional and patient. Instead of following standard verification procedures, you've announced over your building's intercom system that I'm a security threat. You've refused to allow your colleague to perform the standard verification check, and you've made me wait in your lobby while treating me like a criminal." The effect was immediate. More phones came out. The crowd pressed closer. Jasmine's words, measured and precise, drew a quiet current of agreement from the people around her. Heads nodded, Eyes met hers, offering silent support. Derek tried to reclaim the moment. "Ma'am, if you don't like our security procedures, you're free to leave and schedule your meeting for another time." Jasmine smiled, a small, knowing smile, one that signaled she knew the game, knew the outcome, and had already decided to wait it out. "Actually, I think I'll wait right here. My colleague should be down any moment." And then, as if summoned by her confidence, the elevator chimed. Grace Kim stepped out, scanning the lobby, her expression businesslike but tinged with concern. She moved quickly to Jasmine's side. "Ms. Brooks, I'm so sorry for the confusion. Your access credentials should have been processed yesterday. Let me escort you up immediately." The silence that fell over the lobby was almost a physical presence. Derek's jaw slackened. Amanda's hands fluttered over the countertop, unsure where to rest. Robert stared at the floor. Keisha allowed herself a small sigh of relief. Grace turned to Derek, voice cool and clipped. "Mr. Sullivan, Ms. Brooks is our new Chief Executive Officer. She starts officially today, but the board has been expecting her since 8:30 for her introductory meetings. Why is she still in the lobby?" There was a collective intake of breath as the meaning of those words sank in. Chief Executive Officer. The title carried weight, power, and, for Derek, a sinking sense of dread. Around the lobby, the mood flipped from suspense to shock to anticipation. Everyone knew something historic was happening, and that every second was being recorded for posterity. Derek's mouth moved, but the words came slowly. "CEO, we weren't notified." Grace's expression never faltered. "You weren't notified because notification isn't required for executive access." Ms. Brooks provided her temporary credentials, which should have been verified through standard procedures. Instead, she was treated as a security threat and made to wait in the lobby like a suspicious visitor. Amanda tried to salvage her own role. "We were just following protocol. We didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't bother to verify her credentials," Keisha said, stepping forward. "I offered to run the standard check 3 times. You refused to let me do my job." Grace nodded at Keisha. "Thank you for trying to maintain proper procedures. Your professionalism will be noted in our incident report." The phrase, "incident report," was a bell-tolling doom for Derek and Amanda. Even Robert, who'd been silent most of the time, felt the ground shift under his feet. Jasmine looked around, taking in every face, every bystander, every phone, every potential witness. She wasn't angry, but disappointment shone in her eyes, a disappointment deeper and sharper than any fury. "Before we go upstairs, Grace, I'd like to understand exactly what standard procedure is for visitor verification in this building." Grace answered crisply. "Standard procedure is a 2-minute background check through our security database. If the visitor's credentials are valid, they receive a temporary access badge and are escorted or directed to their destination floor. The entire process typically takes less than 5 minutes. Jasmine turned to Derek. "How long have you been making me wait?" Derek glanced at his watch. "About 15 minutes. And in those 15 minutes, did you perform the standard verification check?" No answer. "Did you even attempt to verify my credentials through your system?" The silence was suffocating. Jasmine stepped closer to the desk, her voice soft but steely. "Derek, Amanda, Robert, I want you to understand something very clearly. I didn't walk into this building as a test or a trap. I walked in as your new CEO, expecting to be treated with the same professional courtesy you show every other visitor. Instead, you profiled me, delayed me, and publicly humiliated me in the lobby of my own company." Derek's voice, desperate and thin, tried one last time. "We couldn't have known you were the CEO. You don't look like—" He stopped, realizing too late what he'd said, what he'd almost admitted out loud. Jasmine locked eyes with him. "I don't look like what, Derek?" The question lingered, heavy and unavoidable. Carlos Rivera shook his head and turned away, muttering, "Shameful." The lobby was a courtroom, the evidence plain for all to see, the jury composed of employees, visitors, and the invisible audience already forming online. Lindsay Carter's live stream was exploding with comments, "This is why diversity matters." He just ended his own career. This is the story of the year. Grace's voice cut through the moment. Ms. Brooks, shall we proceed to the executive floor? The board is waiting for you. Jasmine nodded but paused, making one more call. Michael, I'm still in the lobby. We need to have a conversation about building security protocols before I meet with the board. On the other end, Michael Thompson, chairman of the board, responded instantly. Jasmine, what's the problem? You should have been upstairs 20 minutes ago. I'll explain when you come down, but I think the entire leadership team needs to hear this. The next elevator ride was different. It wasn't just Grace and Jasmine. This time, the doors opened to reveal Michael Thompson, 3 board members, and a new level of tension. They saw Jasmine standing, not on the executive floor as expected, but in the center of a storm she had not created but would now have to resolve. Michael took in the scene, the phones, the crowd, the red-faced Derek, the still recording Lindsay, the determined Keisha, the silent Amanda, and Robert. He understood instantly that this was not a simple misunderstanding. This was an inflection point, a reckoning, and it was all happening under the brightest, harshest lights. What happened here? Michael asked, his voice heavy with leadership, responsibility, and an undercurrent of regret. Jasmine Brooks, about to become CEO in the most public way possible, prepared to tell a story that would change the course of Meridian's history. The crowd drew closer. Phones remained up. Derek Sullivan, for the first time in 23 years, did not have an answer. And that, at last, was how the confrontation in the lobby of Meridian Corporate Tower began. Not with a handshake or a welcome, but with a challenge, a refusal, and the slow public unraveling of power that would echo through every floor of the company for years to come. Michael Thompson, chairman of the board, stepped into the lobby that had just become the stage for Meridian Corporation's defining moment. He was trailed by Patricia Williams, James Anderson, and Susan Clark, each one bearing the kind of authority that made junior staff shrink back, and even security guards stand a little straighter. But no posture, no veneer of control could disguise the unease in their eyes as they saw the gathered crowd, the raised phones, the palpable charge in the air. Jasmine Brooks turned toward the board, her face composed but unmistakably resolute. There was a hush. For a moment, all the daily noise of commerce and foot traffic seemed to fall away. What remained was an audience, silent and expectant, waiting for the next move in a drama that was already unfolding across social media. Michael quickly scanned the scene. The cluster of security at the counter. Amanda Foster looking pale, Robert Hayes with his gaze fixed on the floor, Keisha Adams upright at her desk, and Derek Sullivan, once unassailable, reduced to a trembling silhouette, the color draining from his face. Jasmine's presence at the heart of it all was magnetic, a still point in a storm she had not chosen but would now command. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her authority, earned through years of struggle and triumph, spoke for her. I arrived at 8:47 this morning, Jasmine began, her voice steady, not a trace of trembling. With proper documentation for executive floor access, I presented my credentials to your security team and requested verification according to your building's protocols. Instead of a 2-minute check, I was told the process could take up to an hour. Michael glanced at Grace Kim, who gave him a tiny, confirming nod. When your receptionist, Keisha, offered to run the standard verification check, she was told to return to her station and threatened with disciplinary action. When I made a brief call to coordinate with Grace, I was told I was violating security policy. And finally, your head of security announced over your intercom system that I was a potential threat attempting unauthorized access. The board members digested this. Susan Clark, the legal counsel, was already making notes, her lips pressed into a thin, determined line. Patricia Williams's eyes hardened with every word, understanding not just the legal, but the cultural stakes. Michael turned to Derek. Is this an accurate account? Derek couldn't find his voice. He managed, Sir, we were just following security protocols. We didn't know she was the new CEO. Grace stepped forward, her professionalism razor sharp. Ms. Brooks's temporary credentials were uploaded to our system yesterday. Her name, photo, and clearance were all documented. A standard check would have confirmed her identity in 2 minutes. The board's expressions turned from confusion to disbelief to growing anger. James Anderson, always careful with words, kept his tone low, but his meaning was clear. You refused to perform a basic check on the credentials of our new CEO? Derek's protest was feeble. There were irregularities. Keisha, standing her ground, cut through his evasion. There were no irregularities. Her credentials were correct. I offered to verify them 3 times. Each time, Mr. Sullivan stopped me. No one missed the tremor in Derek's hands as he realized the ground had shifted beneath him. The crowd in the lobby pressed closer, a living wall of silent witnesses, some covertly recording, others overtly streaming the events. The internet was already awash with hashtags: "Your CEO confrontation," "Meridian moment," "Bias exposed." Amanda, her confidence dissolving, tried to intervene. "I apologize, I should have..." Jasmine faced her, her gaze unwavering. "Should have insisted on protocol. Should have checked my credentials. Should have treated me with the professionalism you extend to every other visitor. Instead, you made me wait and allowed your colleague to escalate the situation into a public spectacle." The truth of that statement rippled outward, uncomfortable but undeniable. Michael, always decisive in crisis, spoke with the gravity of leadership. "Ms. Brooks, on behalf of the board and Meridian, I apologize. This is unacceptable. This is not how we conduct ourselves, and it is certainly not how we welcome new leadership." But Jasmine wasn't here for apologies alone. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. But this isn't just a mistake. This is a pattern, one I've seen my whole career. Today it happened publicly. Tomorrow it could happen to another visitor, an employee, a client. If this is how you treat your CEO, how do you treat those with less visible authority?" The question hung heavy in the air. Susan Clark closed her notebook, speaking not just as legal counsel, but as an advocate for justice. "Ms. Brooks, you're absolutely right. What happened this morning could constitute both discrimination and hostile work environment under federal law. We need a full investigation and immediate corrective action." Jasmine turned back to Derek, Amanda, and Robert, her voice now for the record, for the crowd, for every phone and every bystander. "In your combined decades here, how many visitors have you made wait for 15 minutes after they provided correct documentation?" Derek faltered, grasping for any answer that might save him. "It depends. How many white executives in expensive suits have you delayed after they showed the right paperwork?" Derek fell silent, his posture collapsing. Around them, murmurs from the crowd, and then, unexpectedly, from Carlos Rivera, who had watched everything with a maintenance worker's realism. "Man, just say it. We all see what happened." Patricia Williams, her voice like a bell, ended it. "Mr. Sullivan, you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Please surrender your credentials and leave the building. HR will contact you regarding documentation and benefits." In that moment, Derek's career ended, not in a private office, but in public, witnessed by a crowd that would never forget what they had seen. Amanda, white-faced, tried to defend herself. "I was just..." Keisha stepped in with dignity. "I tried to follow protocol. I was stopped. I did my job. He didn't." Grace Kim pulled up security records on her tablet, speaking for the data. "Mr. Thompson, Mr. Sullivan has processed 47 executive visitors in the last month. Average processing time, 3 minutes. Only one was delayed for more than 5, due to a documented system malfunction." Numbers told what words couldn't. Michael turned, not just to the employees, but to every witness, every phone. "What happened today does not reflect our values. We will act so it never happens again." He looked to Jasmine. "What do you want to see next?" Jasmine paused, her answer shaping the company's future. "Full review of all protocols, mandatory bias training for all staff, private meeting with Keisha Adams about her role, and public acknowledgement of what happened, so no one forgets why we have to change." In that moment, applause erupted. Not the stiff clapping of formal gatherings, but something real, a release of pent-up emotion. Lindsay Carter's live stream caught it all. her voice trembling as she narrated, "This is what leadership looks like. This is what change looks like." Derek Sullivan gathered his things, his humiliation complete. Amanda was escorted to HR. Robert, silent and shaken, faced a suspension pending review. Keisha, still stunned, was called to Jasmine's side. "Ms. Adams, I'd like to offer you a position as Director of Guest Relations. You have integrity. That's what we need here." Keisha could barely speak, her voice shaking with shock and gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am. I just did what I thought was right." "You did more than that," Jasmine said quietly. "You showed courage when it mattered." The crowd began to disperse, but the lobby itself felt changed, as if some ancient shadow had finally lifted. Lindsay Carter's stream continued, her audience growing by the minute. "I came here to cover a conference, but I watched a company wake up instead." The word spread. By noon, the incident had gone viral. Meridian's boardroom became a war room, legal, HR, PR, and leadership strategizing how to respond to the wave of attention. Jasmine, calm amid the chaos, met with Keisha privately. "I want you on my executive team," she said. "Not for optics, for change, for proof that we mean what we say." Keisha was honest. "I'm not an executive. I don't have the degrees." Jasmine smiled. "Degrees don't teach you courage. Your story is the first one we'll tell as we rebuild." Meanwhile, Michael Thompson assembled the board for an emergency meeting. "What happened today will define us," he told them. "Either we bury it and rot from within, or we let it change us." Susan Clark moved quickly, assembling documentation for disciplinary action. She coordinated with outside counsel, ensuring Meridian's exposure was minimized, but also that accountability would be real. Patricia Williams drafted a statement to employees and clients. "Meridian Corporation does not tolerate discrimination. We acted decisively. We will do better." In HR, Amanda Foster tried to plead her case. She found no sympathy. "I just followed orders," she insisted. "I just went along." The answer was cold. That's what everyone says until change becomes real. By late afternoon, the media was at the doors. Grace Kim, now tasked with crisis communication, coordinated Jasmine's first press conference. "I want transparency," Jasmine insisted. "No spin, no PR gloss. I want to tell them what happened, what it means, and what we'll do." That evening, Lindsay Carter's video hit 1 million views. In offices and living rooms across the country, people watched as a new CEO refused to be humiliated, refused to disappear, and demanded change, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been made to feel lesser in a place they'd earned the right to be. Inside Meridian, the shockwaves continued. Employees whispered about the lobby incident, some still anxious, some quietly triumphant. For Black employees especially, there was a sense of validation, of long-held grievances finally being seen and named. Carlos Rivera, maintenance manager, found his own life changed. Jasmine sought him out, thanked him for speaking up, and promised a new kind of recognition for every person who keeps this place running, not just those in suits. The next morning, the company newsletter featured Jasmine's statement in full. No spin, no deflection, an acknowledgement of harm, a commitment to action, an invitation to hold leadership accountable. Across the city, other companies took note. HR teams forwarded the story. Executives debated their own policies, some with guilt, some with resolve. Derek Sullivan, whose name was now trending for all the wrong reasons, began the long, lonely reckoning that would follow. But for Jasmine, Keisha, Grace, Carlos, and every witness to that morning's events, something fundamental had changed. The air was different. The old rules no longer held. Jasmine walked the halls as CEO, stopping to greet employees, listening to their stories, inviting them into the process of transformation. She did not forget the pain of the morning, but neither did she allow it to define her. Instead, she turned it outward, using it as the foundation of a new kind of leadership. By the end of the week, Meridian's board had adopted her full plan: bias training, anonymous reporting, an independent review of every level of the company, and a commitment to transparency, no matter how uncomfortable it became. The lobby itself became a symbol, a place where power had been misused and reclaimed, where prejudice had been exposed and challenged, where a company's future had been rewritten in real time, not by its policies or profits, but by the courage of one woman who would not be turned away. As Jasmine looked out from her new office on the executive floor, she could see the city sprawling into the distance, full of companies that would, perhaps, learn from Meridian's reckoning. She knew the work ahead would be relentless, the resistance real, but she also knew that the change had begun, and that nothing now could stop it. The Meridian Corporation boardroom, where fortunes were made and lost and where years of tradition clung to the walnut paneling, now carried the weight of a new legacy. Jasmine Brooks had called a special meeting within hours of the confrontation, and for the first time in recent memory, every seat around the table was occupied. There was no agenda, no neatly printed packet, just a palpable sense that Meridian had crossed a threshold and could never return. Michael Thompson, whose instincts for reading a room had steered him through mergers and boardroom coups, sat at the head of the table, but the unspoken truth was clear. Jasmine held the center now. Every board member, every division head, every department representative present felt the shift. Even the usually unflappable Susan Clark, legal counsel, kept glancing at Jasmine, gauging her mood, trying to anticipate what might come next. Jasmine didn't begin with a speech. Instead, she asked a question. How many of you heard about what happened in the lobby this morning before you saw it on the news? The answer, most had not. For all their supposed connections and influence, the first inkling of trouble had come not through internal channels, but via trending tags and push notifications. Some had learned of the story through emails from concerned clients. Others saw the now viral video recorded and broadcast by Lindsay Carter before their assistants even briefed them. Patricia Williams, always direct, spoke first. We lost control of the story before it even started. Jasmine nodded. We lost control because there wasn't a story worth defending. This company, like too many others, relied on the assumption that our policies and our culture were enough. Today, those assumptions collapsed. Our clients, our partners, our own employees, especially those who have felt the sting of bias and exclusion, have seen that we are not immune to the failings we pretend only exist elsewhere. A low murmur of assent moved through the room. The veneer of corporate certainty was cracking, and no one felt entirely safe behind it. James Anderson, a board member who had championed Meridian's expansion into new markets, leaned forward, hands clasped. Where do we start? We need to respond fast, but we also need to get this right. If this feels performative, we're finished. Susan Clark nodded. And from a legal standpoint, transparency is our only shield. If we hide behind spin, we'll get shredded in court and in the press. Grace Kim, now an invaluable bridge between administration and leadership, spoke up. We have to start with the people, not just policy. I've already had 36 employees email me with stories of their own, about security, about HR, about clients making comments that were ignored. Jasmine listened, jotting notes, but her eyes kept moving around the table, taking in the mixture of fear, defensiveness, and, in a few faces, hope. The only way we change the story, Jasmine said, is by changing the reality. Not just for me, not just for the board, for everyone. If we can be honest now, if we can be accountable, we can rebuild trust. But if we minimize, if we get defensive, we will lose not only public faith but our best people. Oh. Patricia Williams set down her pen. I recommend we begin with an internal amnesty. Encourage every employee to come forward anonymously if needed about discrimination or bias they've witnessed or experienced. We guarantee no retaliation and prioritize urgent investigations. Susan, quick to turn concept to action, began drafting. I'll work with HR and legal to set up the process. It must be airtight. Jasmine nodded. That's one step. But there's another. We need to own this publicly. I'll give a press conference this afternoon. No scripts, no PR language. I'll answer questions directly, and I'll commit to every step we're taking. including the leadership changes. The room stilled at this. Transparency at this level was rare and terrifying. James voiced the concern. Are you sure that's wise? The more you say, the more potential liability? Jasmine's answer was unhesitating. If we fear honesty, we have no business leading. Michael backed her. Let's do it. No half measures. We've talked about culture for years. Now we prove what it means. The hours before the press conference unfolded like a hurricane inside Meridian. HR scrambled to process the terminations and suspensions. Amanda Foster's file grew thick with documentation. Robert Hayes faced his own hearing. IT set up a secure channel for employee reports, receiving 27 messages within the first hour. The new director of guest relations, Keisha Adams, still reeling from her sudden promotion, fielded calls from news outlets, civil rights groups, and other companies seeking comment. Jasmine, meanwhile, met with teams across the organization. She listened as Black and brown employees shared experiences they had buried for years, subtle slights, missed promotions, the feeling that every day was a test of endurance as much as performance. Some of these employees were angry, some were exhausted. A few, especially older staffers, admitted they never expected to see a day when someone like them would not only survive such an incident, but use it to force institutional change. Others remained wary. Not everyone believed change could outlast the headlines. You'll make some speeches, a senior systems analyst told her bluntly, and then, in a few months, the old guard will find a way to freeze you out. They always do. Jasmine looked him in the eye. That's why I need you with me. Change isn't a solo act. It's the sum of everyone who refuses to let this go back to the way it was. He nodded, not convinced, but less alone. By early afternoon, the lobby was filled with reporters, cameras, and staff. The morning's energy, thick with tension and shock, had settled into something different, a nervous anticipation, but also the quiet thrill of witnessing history. Jasmine walked to the microphone, flanked by Michael Thompson and Patricia Williams. Grace Kim stood beside Keisha Adams, their presence intentional, proof that the company's leadership now looked more like the city outside its doors. She began simply, "This morning I was prevented from accessing my own executive floor because of assumptions made about who belongs where. That moment was humiliating, but it was not unique. It was visible. And that is the only difference between my experience and the experiences of countless others here and elsewhere." She didn't flinch from the truth. "I was profiled. My credentials were ignored. When a colleague tried to do her job and verify my status, she was threatened. When I attempted to call for assistance, I was told I was violating security. This is the pattern so many people face in workplaces across America." She explained the steps Meridian was taking. Immediate staff changes, a comprehensive review of all security and HR policies, a new channel for employee reports, mandatory bias training, third-party audits, and an open-door policy for the executive team. Reporters fired questions about her personal feelings, the risk to Meridian's reputation, whether heads would roll higher up. Jasmine answered, point blank, "Accountability means everyone, from the board to the front desk. If we find failures at the highest levels, we will act. If clients or partners expect us to ignore these issues, we will let them go. Because a company that stands for nothing is already bankrupt, no matter what the ledgers say." Her words landed hard and were carried instantly through every news network, blog, and social feed. When the press conference ended, the lobby erupted, not just in applause, but in a sense of collective exhale, as if a weight had been lifted. Employees hugged one another. Junior staffers wiped away tears. Executives, many of whom had never questioned the system before, realized the ground beneath them had changed. Behind closed doors, the hard work began. Jasmine met with HR and legal to set up an emergency audit. Every complaint, every pattern of hiring or promotion that suggested bias, every past incident swept under the rug. For the first time, employees saw the doors open to real investigation, not just polite words. HR Director Elise Monroe, who had always quietly advocated for change but felt powerless, now saw her chance. She organized listening sessions, anonymous, facilitated, and raw. Stories poured out. A black manager denied access to the client lounge, an Asian engineer whose ideas were routinely credited to someone else, a Latina executive mistaken for administrative staff at every annual retreat. These accounts weren't new, but now, for the first time, people believed they might lead to action. Jasmine and Patricia Williams sat through every session, not as figureheads but as participants. When necessary, Jasmine challenged senior leaders directly, no matter their tenure or title. In one session, a department head protested, "This is a witch hunt. I've never seen color. I only care about results." Jasmine met his eyes. Results speak. But so do the patterns we see. Who gets promoted? Who gets silenced? Who gets the benefit of the doubt? If your team doesn't trust you, your results are suspect. Some leaders quit, unable or unwilling to accept the new rules. Others adapted, eager to align themselves with the new direction. But the message was unmistakable. The old culture was over. Outside Meridian, the response was swift. Clients called to express support or concern, or sometimes both. Some issued statements praising the company's openness. A few threatened to sever ties if controversy continued. Jasmine let those go. We don't need clients who only care about appearances. Recruiters reported a surge of interest from talent that had previously ignored Meridian. Diverse candidates drawn by the promise of real inclusion flooded the website with applications. Existing employees saw friends and former colleagues reach out, excited that a company might finally mean what it said about diversity. Professional associations and advocacy groups held up Meridian as a new standard, not perfect, but brave enough to try. Jasmine was invited to speak at conferences, address business schools, and consult for other companies in crisis. She accepted only a few, preferring to spend her energy building change at home. Internally, transformation didn't come easily. The first round of anonymous employee reports revealed incidents stretching back years. Some were minor slights, others more severe, cases of outright discrimination, retaliation, even harassment. Each was investigated. When wrongdoing was found, consequences followed: demotions, terminations, new training. Keisha Adams, in her new role, set the tone for guest relations. She hired a staff that reflected the city's true diversity, trained them personally, and instituted a policy. Everyone who entered Meridian's lobby, from janitor to billionaire investor, would be treated with the same respect. She also reached out to other companies, sharing Meridian's evolving policies and encouraging peer organizations to adopt their own reforms. Meanwhile, Carlos Rivera, the maintenance supervisor whose outspokenness had helped shift the lobby's energy, became a kind of folk hero inside Meridian. Jasmine promoted him, publicly acknowledging his integrity and using his example to encourage others to speak up. Jasmine's leadership style became a subject of debate in business magazines and management seminars. She eschewed the trappings of power, sitting with junior staff in the cafeteria, opening her office hours to anyone who wished to talk, and responding personally to every employee who wrote to her about bias, opportunity, or fear. She demanded excellence, but also accountability. When a department's performance review showed patterns of favoritism or exclusion, she intervened directly, sometimes reorganizing teams, sometimes removing leaders who refused to adapt. "Change isn't comfortable," she told her senior team. "If you want comfort, you're in the wrong company. If you want to build something lasting, something that outlives any of us, then stay and help me do the work." For some, the New World Order felt like a threat, but for many, especially those who had watched the old guard with resigned eyes, it felt like vindication and hope. By the end of her first quarter, Jasmine faced the numbers. Employee satisfaction up by 24%, turnover down, new clients acquired. But she knew the real test would come with time. Complacency was always the enemy of change. She instituted quarterly culture audits, hiring outside firms to survey staff, observe meetings, and analyze patterns. These weren't just for show. Results were shared company-wide, and action plans created in response. The media coverage, initially fierce, settled into respect. Articles in national papers traced the company's journey from crisis to reform. Business schools sent students to interview staff. Civil rights groups lauded the company's transparency and commitment, using Meridian as a case study. Internally, the culture shifted. Employees called out bias when they saw it, confident that they would be supported. Promotion and hiring panels included diverse voices, and every senior executive was held personally accountable for meeting new inclusion goals. But Jasmine never forgot the cost of change. She kept a photo of that lobby confrontation, a screenshot from Lindsay Carter's viral video, framed on her office wall. Not as a trophy, but as a warning. This happened. It can happen again. Never forget why we started. She continued to meet with employees, sometimes holding late-night sessions with teams working overtime, sometimes dropping in on new hire orientations to tell her story, not the sanitized version, but the raw truth. She invited Keisha to speak at those meetings, and together they shared their vision for a company where everyone belonged. 6 months after the incident, the lobby looked unchanged to a casual visitor, but the spirit within it was transformed. Tyrone Mitchell, the new head of security, greeted every guest warmly, quickly verifying credentials without bias. His team was the most diverse in the company's history, and he made it a point to train them personally in both security protocols and respect. Keisha's guest relations team worked with precision and empathy. Feedback surveys from visitors, vendors, and staff all reflected the new reality. Meridian's reputation for hospitality was unmatched. Employees who had once avoided the executive floor now felt welcome. When the quarterly all-hands meetings took place, the room was packed, not just with department heads, but with staff from every level, eager to participate. Outside, the company's transformation inspired others. Business journals tracked Meridian's progress, noting the positive impact on recruitment, retention, and public image. Other firms quietly consulted with Jasmine and her team, hoping to learn and sometimes to emulate what they had accomplished. Not every story ended happily. Derek Sullivan struggled to find new work, his name now synonymous with the worst kind of corporate gatekeeping. Amanda Foster's lawsuit failed, her behavior too well documented for any jury to believe her claims. Robert Hayes, after intensive retraining and a heartfelt apology to Jasmine and Keisha, was given a chance to earn back trust. But for the majority, Meridian's story became a source of pride, proof that change, though painful, was possible. On the anniversary of the confrontation, Jasmine stood once more in the lobby, surrounded by staff, board members, and a few select journalists. She addressed the crowd with her characteristic blend of candor and hope. "We are not perfect, but we are better, and every day we choose to be better. That is the only way forward." A standing ovation followed, not orchestrated, not polite, but real. For the first time in years, the applause felt earned. And as Jasmine looked out over the crowd, faces of every color, every age, every background, she knew that the real measure of her leadership would not be in how many headlines she had generated, but in how many lives she had helped to change. How many people now walked through Meridian's doors, certain of their dignity and worth. The lobby that had once been a barrier was now a threshold. And the company that had once believed itself immune to the world's ills now stood as proof that transformation, once begun, could ripple outward, changing not just a single organization, but the expectations of an entire industry. In the months following the press conference, Meridian Corporate Tower pulsed with the nervous, electrified energy of real transformation. For all the talk of culture change that had come before, this was different. Now, every person in the building, from the security desk to the executive suites, could feel it. Something was happening that couldn't be contained by a memo, a mission statement, or a carefully worded diversity pledge. Jasmine Brooks knew the real work had just begun. The headlines had faded from the front pages, replaced by other corporate crises, But inside Meridian, the memory of that fateful Tuesday morning remained a touchstone. Employees repeated stories of what they'd seen and heard. The viral video lived on in the company's onboarding materials, and every new visitor, every client who walked through the lobby was aware that this was no longer a company where assumptions would go unchallenged. Jasmine refused to let anyone forget, not because she wanted to wallow in the pain of that day, but because she understood how easily institutions slipped back into comfort and denial once the cameras disappeared. She'd spent years in companies where diversity training was a yearly box to tick, where town halls were more performance than progress, and where accountability was little more than a promise to do better next time. Not here, not now. 6 months after the incident, Meridian's annual employee survey yielded the highest participation rate in the company's history. More than 90% of staff, from entry-level analysts to division vice presidents, filled out the confidential online form. The results were electrifying. For the first time, Black, Latino, Asian, and LGBTQ+ employees reported feeling seen and heard at work as their top cultural experience. White employees, many of whom had never considered whether their presence was assumed or their voice was welcomed, reported a new level of self-awareness about privilege and bias. Anonymous comments, once perfunctory, now flowed with detail. Some recounted the pain and embarrassment of past slights. Others described gratitude for the new leadership, or simply curiosity about what true equity might look like. More than a few expressed skepticism. Would this last? Would Jasmine's momentum stall, as so many before her had, under pressure from shareholders and old guard executives? The data didn't surprise Jasmine, but it did strengthen her resolve. She and Patricia Williams, now the board's chief diversity liaison, spent weeks combing through every comment. They met with focus groups, cross-checked survey responses with HR records, and began to identify the hidden hotspots of resistance, departments where progress was slow, leaders whose approach to inclusion was still stuck in the past. Jasmine made unannounced visits to those departments. She sat at cluttered desks and in windowless conference rooms, inviting candid conversation from anyone willing to speak. She asked open questions, what's working, what isn't, and listened more than she talked. Her very presence in these spaces was a quiet act of rebellion against the hierarchy that had once kept the executive floor sealed off from the rank and file. Some employees welcomed her with stories of hope. Others met her with wary silence. But no one could say she was an absentee CEO. Her leadership was visible, persistent, and rooted in the realities of her people. Meanwhile, Keisha Adams thrived in her new role as Director of Guest Relations. The staff she recruited was as varied as Chicago itself. She brought in bilingual front desk managers, hired veterans with backgrounds in hospitality, and made sure her team included people who had previously felt othered in corporate spaces. She instituted a standing daily meeting, a brief huddle at 8:30 a.m. in the lobby to review the visitor list, troubleshoot special needs, and role-play difficult situations. On Fridays, she invited guest speakers, civil rights lawyers, local activists, even former security staff from other buildings to share perspectives on bias, belonging, and the subtleties of customer service. The results were dramatic. Guest satisfaction soared. Vendors and delivery personnel, often invisible in corporate cultures, began leaving positive feedback for Keisha's team. Even the most jaded executives had to admit that visitors left Meridian talking about the warmth and professionalism of the experience. But Keisha's impact went beyond hospitality. She was now one of the most visible Black women in the building, a mentor to young employees and a living, breathing argument against the old belief that diversity initiatives were mere optics. She met with new hires, visited high schools on career days, and became a key figure in Jasmine's ongoing mission to make Meridian's transformation real. Keisha and Jasmine became close collaborators, regularly sharing ideas and concerns over coffee in the corner cafe on the ground floor. They laughed over memories of that first day, the sting of being underestimated, the sudden spotlight, the weirdness of going viral. But they also planned, strategized, and supported each other in the hard work of holding the company accountable for the promises it now made. "I don't want to be a symbol," Keisha confided once as the winter sun spilled through the glass. "I want to be the proof that we can build something new and keep it going, even when you're not in the room." "You already are," Jasmine answered, "and I'm going to make sure you never have to do it alone." Not everyone was pleased with the direction Meridian was taking. In certain departments, especially those where leaders had built their careers on networks of similarity, same alma mater, same country club, same tight circles of trust, resentment simmered beneath the surface. Anonymous chat forums sprang up, some mocking the diversity crusade, others expressing fear that qualified people were being passed over for quota hires. Jasmine monitored these forums closely, not to punish dissent, but to understand the sources of resistance and address them head-on. She met with department heads, challenging them to prove that their hiring and promotion processes were truly equitable. When she found evidence of favoritism, she acted, sometimes with a stern conversation, sometimes with a personnel change. She didn't fire for bad attitude alone, but she demanded adaptation. Those who learned, who apologized for past mistakes and sought to improve, were given every resource to grow. Those who undermined the new culture were invited to seek success elsewhere. Jasmine's approach to discipline was firm but fair. She didn't seek scapegoats, but she wouldn't tolerate sabotage. The message was clear. This isn't about optics. This is about making Meridian the kind of company where everyone has a fair chance to rise. In one memorable instance, a longtime manager pushed back during a meeting, declaring, "You're turning this company into a social experiment." Jasmine didn't flinch. Every company is a social experiment. The question is whether you want to be part of one that works for everyone, or just for people who look like you. The silence in the room was electric, but it was followed by a tentative, then enthusiastic applause from staff who had never before seen such direct leadership. Outside Meridian, the business press was fascinated. Profile pieces appeared in national magazines. The CEO who faced bias on her first day and changed everything. Cable news panels debated whether Jasmine's reforms would survive a downturn or a leadership shakeup. Trade publications interviewed recruiters and analysts who marveled at the surge in applications, especially from young, diverse, and highly qualified talent. Clients who had watched the press conference or whose own employees shared viral clips began asking questions about their own company's policies. A few older conservative clients voiced discomfort with the politicization of business. Jasmine was unapologetic. Inclusion is good business. If that's controversial, we're okay with that. Other clients, especially in the tech and finance sectors, embraced the change. They started using Meridian's transformation in their own pitches to investors and recruits. New business rolled in, some seeking to benefit from the positive press, others genuinely inspired by Meridian's courage. The ripple effect spread beyond the building. Civil rights groups invited Jasmine and Keisha to speak at conferences and roundtables. Jasmine, careful to avoid becoming a diversity celebrity at the expense of her real work, chose her appearances carefully, focusing on events where Meridian's story could serve as a blueprint for other organizations in need of change. Several business schools adopted Meridian's crisis and recovery as a core case study. MBA students debated Jasmine's leadership style, HR students analyzed the impact of her new policies, and even undergraduates cited her story in essays about workplace discrimination. One student, in a viral commencement speech, declared, "If Jasmine Brooks can turn the worst day of her career into the best thing that ever happened to her company, then we can do the same wherever we go." For Jasmine, the whirlwind of media, meetings, and milestones brought both pride and exhaustion. She was invited to panels, podcasts, and award dinners. Her LinkedIn inbox filled with notes from women and men, young and old, who thanked her for giving me hope or showing us what real leadership looks like. Sometimes she answered these messages late at night, sitting in her office after the building was quiet, remembering her mother's words in that Atlanta hotel room all those years ago. Some evenings, Jasmine called Dr. Diane Brooks to share the day's highs and lows. Her mother, ever the realist, celebrated her victories but warned her to keep her guard up. "You're doing good, Jasmine, but don't let them turn you into a mascot. Your job is to keep opening doors and leaving them open even when the world wants to close them again." Jasmine took that advice to heart. She kept a journal, not just of meetings and policies, but of moments, times when a quiet word from a new hire brightened her day, or when a painful memory threatened to drag her down. She used those stories as fuel to keep going, to keep believing that change was possible and necessary. Meridian's growth presented new challenges. With a flood of new clients and employees, the risk of change fatigue increased. Some staff worried that the company's standards for performance would suffer under the weight of rapid expansion. Others, especially mid-level managers, found themselves struggling to adapt to new accountability measures. Jasmine addressed these concerns directly. She called regular town halls where she answered questions without filtering or evasion. She organized leadership training sessions, focused not just on technical skills but on emotional intelligence, cultural competence, and restorative justice. She demanded regular public reports from every division on their progress in hiring, retention, and promotion. These reports weren't window dressing. When numbers fell short, Jasmine led deep dive sessions to understand the root causes. She brought in outside consultants to help leaders identify blind spots and set achievable goals. She refused to let any department hide behind excuses or cherry-pick data. Keisha and Tyrone Mitchell, now the head of security, became key partners in this work. Tyrone, having experienced bias firsthand as a police officer, instituted regular scenario training for his team, focused on de-escalation, anti-profiling tactics, and the subtle cues that reveal unconscious prejudice. His own story, leaving law enforcement out of frustration with institutional racism, became a powerful tool for building empathy and understanding among his staff. The effect was cumulative. Meridian's culture of accountability was no longer a top-down mandate but a shared commitment. Employees at every level understood that they were part of something historic and that the eyes of the world were still watching. None of this came without cost. There were bruised egos, bitter departures, and lawsuits. Derek Sullivan, still unable to find work in his field, became an object lesson in business school ethics classes and corporate training seminars. Amanda Foster's wrongful termination suit dragged on for months, exposing old emails and private messages that painted a picture of bias and resentment. The board faced hard questions from investors about short-term costs and risks. Jasmine absorbed the blows. She knew that every revolution made enemies, but for every angry ex-employee or skeptical analyst, there were dozens of people whose lives had changed for the better. Staff who had once considered leaving found new hope. Clients who had lost faith in corporate values returned, eager to work with a partner that took integrity seriously. Even the skeptics began to come around. When financial reports showed Meridian outperforming its competitors, critics ran out of ammunition. Shareholders, at first wary of Jasmine's approach, soon reaped the rewards of higher returns, improved retention, and a steadily growing reputation for excellence. As the first anniversary of her appointment approached, Jasmine found herself reflecting more deeply on the journey. She realized that leadership, at its core, was less about command and control and more about building trust. Trust that people's concerns would be heard, that justice would be done, and that progress would not be abandoned when it became inconvenient. She thought often of the faces in the lobby that morning. Derek's bluster, Amanda's tight smile, Robert's nervous glances, Keisha's quiet courage, Carlos Rivera's principled intervention. She remembered the weight of every gaze, the knowledge that her every move would set a precedent not just for Meridian but for all who followed. She was not naive about the persistence of bias. She knew that even now there were those who wished she would fail, who whispered that her reforms were overreach or a distraction from real business. She welcomed their scrutiny. It made her sharper, more determined, less likely to rest on her victories. Her greatest pride, though, came from the stories she heard every day, from employees who felt for the first time that Meridian was truly theirs, from managers who confessed their past mistakes and asked for help to do better, from clients who said, "We trust you," and meant it. To cement Meridian's commitment, Jasmine and the board instituted a new tradition. Every quarter, a town hall was held in the lobby, the very place where the confrontation had taken place. Staff shared stories of success, failure, growth, and learning. Mistakes were acknowledged openly and achievements celebrated. The tradition, at first awkward, soon became a beloved marker of progress, a living reminder that change was both possible and necessary. At the first of these events, Jasmine stood before hundreds of staff, vendors, and clients and told the truth. "We are not a perfect company, but we are an honest one. We are not always comfortable, but we are always learning. We are not here to preserve the old ways. We are here to build something new and to keep building, even when it would be easier to quit." She looked around at her people, and saw pride reflected in their eyes. Not the pride that comes from a job title or a salary, but the pride that comes from knowing you helped turn the tide. As Meridian's second year under Jasmine's leadership began, the future was brighter and more uncertain than ever. New challenges loomed, market downturns, technological disruptions, the ever-present risk that old habits would creep back in. But the foundation was strong. Jasmine understood that every day would require vigilance, humility, and courage. She knew that change was not a finish line, but an endless road. She welcomed it. In her office, she kept a new memento alongside the framed screenshot from the viral video, a stack of handwritten notes from staff, each one telling a different story of growth, hope, and determination. She read them often, especially on difficult days, and let them remind her of what was at stake. Because in the end, the true legacy of Meridian's transformation would not be written by her alone. It would be shaped by every person who dared to demand better, to speak up, to stay and fight for something greater than themselves. And as long as she had breath in her body, Jasmine Brooks would keep the doors open, the conversations honest, and the vision clear. A company where dignity, respect, and justice were not the exception, but the rule. Meridian's transformation, once a headline and a hope, matured into a living, breathing new standard. Employees felt it in their everyday work, in the way conversations unfolded during team meetings, in the courage people showed to call out subtle bias or acknowledge blind spots. Jasmine Brooks' commitment had turned a corporate humiliation into a shared resolve. The memory of that morning in the lobby was not erased. It became part of the company's DNA, woven through new policies, informal mentorships, and the daily rhythm of honest work. The biggest test of Meridian's new culture came with expansion. The company's success, fueled by its renewed reputation and energized workforce, brought a flood of new hires, fresh client contracts, and ambitious projects. Growth, though celebrated, brought strain. Processes once nimble became sluggish. Managers, under pressure, slipped into old habits, reaching for comfort in familiar faces and well-worn ways. Jasmine, never complacent, insisted on vigilance. Each department, no matter its size, underwent quarterly audits on hiring, retention, and promotion. No team could hide behind metrics alone. Narrative reports demanded stories of growth, moments of challenge, lessons learned. Jasmine and the board rolled out a formal sponsorship program. Senior leaders were paired with employees from underrepresented backgrounds, not just to mentor, but to open real doors, introductions, stretch assignments, advocacy at decision-making tables. The sponsorship program flourished, exposing hidden talent and surfacing barriers nobody had bothered to notice before. Promotions followed not just performance, but the proven courage to challenge inequity and drive inclusion. Senior leaders who excelled at these values rose fastest. Those who dragged their feet found themselves outpaced by hungry new directors and creative thinkers who embraced the future Meridian was building. Clients, always attentive to which way the wind was blowing, demanded transparency from their own vendors and partners. Companies that failed to keep pace with Meridian's progress soon felt pressure from shared clients who now saw inclusion as a requirement, not a suggestion. Requests for proposals included new questions about workforce demographics, anti-bias training, and leadership diversity. Jasmine's team became a sought-after resource, advising clients on their own journeys, sharing what had worked and what had failed. The HR department, once a sleepy outpost, buzzed with energy. Keisha Adams, in her new executive post, led quarterly pulse check surveys, sharing anonymized feedback with all staff and the board. Real problems surfaced fast. A project manager whose microaggressions stunted team growth, a middle manager who quietly blocked women from key assignments, a technical lead whose jokes made younger staff uncomfortable. Action followed quickly. Sometimes it meant mediation, other times retraining, and when necessary, letting people go. The goal was never to punish, but to uphold Meridian's promise. No one would be left to carry the burden of speaking out alone. The annual Culture Report became a major event. Instead of a glossy PR piece, it was a transparent, sometimes painful reckoning. Statistics on promotions, salary equity, retention, testimonials from employees at every level, progress toward stated goals, frank admissions where the company had missed the mark. Jasmine insisted that the report be published on the public website. Shareholders grumbled at first, but could not argue with the steady climb of Meridian's stock price, the surging job applications, and the deepened loyalty of clients who felt, perhaps for the first time, that their partner truly reflected their own values. For every story of progress, there were reminders that the fight was ongoing. Anonymous feedback forms revealed fears that bias might return if leadership changed. Some feared diversity fatigue, a growing unease among longtime employees unaccustomed to scrutiny. Jasmine and her team never wavered in their response. Every question was addressed. Every concern was discussed at town halls. Quarterly bias checkpoints were held, not as witch hunts, but as opportunities for learning, growth, and building resilience. Leadership was not the only locus of change. The administrative assistants, once invisible, now received training in recognizing microaggressions, supporting new hires, and acting as ambassadors for Meridian's values. The custodial staff, the cafeteria workers, the IT support team, all were included in regular meetings and open forum feedback sessions. The result was a building where every voice mattered and every person was expected to uphold the company's vision. Midway through the second year, a competitor attempted a high-profile poaching raid, offering bonuses and perks to lure Meridian's top diverse talent away. Very few left. Exit interviews revealed a common refrain. Why would I start over somewhere I might have to fight the same battles all over again? The sense of belonging, the chance to shape culture, the ability to work without constantly proving one's worth. These intangible benefits proved more powerful than money alone. The board, initially cautious, became fierce champions of the new way. Patricia Williams, now Chief Diversity Officer, tracked the company's progress with laser focus. Monthly board meetings opened with a culture check-in alongside financial reports. James Anderson, once a skeptic, became a vocal supporter. His own perspective changed by listening to stories he had never imagined, by working directly with employees whose names and lives he'd never before known. The board's makeup itself changed as new directors brought fresh skills, experiences, and networks into the company's leadership. Jasmine made a point to keep her door and her calendar open. She set aside weekly hours for listening sessions, inviting any employee at any level to share concerns, questions, or ideas for change. She insisted that all leaders do the same. Stories flowed upward, some painful, some hopeful, all essential for understanding where blind spots still lurked. A partnership with local universities expanded Meridian's talent pipeline. Paid internships, scholarships, and mentorships for underrepresented students helped break cycles of exclusion and gave Meridian a direct stake in nurturing future leaders. Former interns came back as full-time employees, citing not just salary but the culture of openness, respect, and accountability that distinguished Meridian from competitors. Jasmine, ever the strategist, knew that culture required constant tending. She built redundancies into the system, anonymous reporting tools, annual third-party audits, rotating leadership for inclusion committees, so that no single person, not even the CEO, could serve as the sole guardian of the company's conscience. Every division was expected to innovate, report, and improve. Failure to do so triggered intervention, not as punishment, but as a commitment to the standards that defined Meridian. Outside the company, Jasmine's influence spread. Industry groups adopted elements of Meridian's training for their own conferences. National business publications ranked Meridian among the best workplaces for inclusion and equity. Other CEOs reached out to Jasmine for guidance, advice, and partnership. She chose her public appearances carefully, preferring small, focused gatherings where real strategies and stories could be shared over performative sound bites. The wider business world noticed. Client contracts included new language on non-discrimination, anti-bias training, and equity in leadership. Industry benchmarks shifted, with Meridian setting the pace. Competing firms began hiring diversity officers, implementing reporting systems, and holding their own culture town halls, some sincerely, others reluctantly, all influenced by the example Meridian set. Within the company, small stories signaled the deepest changes. Teams that once hesitated to challenge unfairness now did so, knowing they would be supported. Employees who once hid their identities out of fear now spoke openly about their lives, confident that respect was not just a slogan. New hires, especially those from backgrounds historically excluded from corporate leadership, brought energy, ideas, and resilience. Even setbacks, when a microaggression surfaced or a team reverted to clique behavior, were met not with silence but with swift, open acknowledgement and correction. The culture of accountability extended up the chain. Jasmine herself faced hard questions from staff and the board. She welcomed them. Transparency, she insisted, was not just a tool for PR but a necessity for trust. She admitted mistakes, shared her own learning process, and encouraged others to do the same. Leadership, in her view, was not perfection but progress, a relentless commitment to move forward, however messy the process. The ripple effect reached families and communities. Employees took Meridian's culture home, teaching their children about fairness and dignity, sharing their stories at church, community events, and with friends. The company's volunteer days, once sporadic, became regular fixtures. Staff tutored in local schools, built homes, supported food banks, and offered job-shadowing opportunities to neighborhood youth. Jasmine believed Meridian could not be good at work and indifferent outside it. The company's growing reputation made recruitment easier, partnerships stronger, and old adversaries into new allies. As the third year approached, Jasmine saw signs that real change was lasting. The incident was still discussed, but now as origin story, not open wound. Employees referenced it with pride. The day Meridian woke up, the day things changed for good. The story was not used as a shield against criticism, but as a rallying cry to keep pushing, keep questioning, keep growing. Jasmine knew the journey was far from finished. Each success brought new risks, complacency, backlash, the slow erosion of standards if the will to change weakened. She kept her guard up. She kept her standards high. She made sure every new hire, every vendor, every client understood what Meridian stood for and what it would not tolerate. The story of Meridian's transformation, once just a viral video and a wave of commentary, had become something much bigger. It had become the proof that companies could change, that leaders could choose courage over comfort, and that systems, however entrenched, could be rebuilt to serve everyone, not just the favored few. Jasmine, reflecting in her office late one night, read through a folder of thank you notes. Some were from employees whose lives had changed, first-time promotions, the chance to speak without fear, the ability to bring their whole selves to work. Others came from clients, community members, even strangers moved by the story of Meridian's evolution. Jasmine felt pride, but also humility. Each note was a reminder of what was at stake and what could still be lost if vigilance waned. A letter from Keisha Adams caught her eye. Keisha wrote not just of gratitude for opportunity, but of the deeper meaning of belonging. She wrote of the freedom to lead, to innovate, to challenge, and to care without apology. Her words resonated with Jasmine. I want to make sure this is never just about us. I want Meridian to be the reason other companies change too. Jasmine penned a reply, promising her support, her partnership, and her own ongoing commitment to keeping the doors open for all who followed. In her heart, she knew that this was the real legacy, not her own advancement, not even Meridian's success, but the hope that their story would continue to ripple outward, changing minds, opening hearts, and forging a new standard for justice in business. The transformation was never perfect, never complete, and always in motion. But Meridian, once the setting of a public humiliation, had become something else entirely, a beacon of what was possible when a single moment of injustice was met with resolve, integrity, and the relentless pursuit of what was right. And through it all, Jasmine Brooks never stopped believing in her people, in her mission, and in the power of change that starts with a single no and echoes, if you nurture it, into a world of yes.